The Senate of the first called session of the 89th legislature will come to order. The secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado. Betancourt. Birdwell. Blanco. Campbell. Cook. Creighton. Eckhart. Flores. Gutierrez. Hagenbu. Hall. Hinojosa Hidalgo. Nueces. Hinojosa Hidalgo. Huffman. Hughes. Johnson. King. Colcourse. Menendez. Middleton. Miles. Nichols. Parker. Paxton. Perry. Schwartner. Sparks. West. Zaffarini.
Members, a quorum is present. Welcome back. Please rise for the invocation in the gallery and on the floor, delivered by Pastor Travis Dice, First Baptist Church of Round Rock, Texas. Pastor.
Good afternoon. Let's pray. Almighty God, we come before you today, Lord, with our hearts full of gratitude. We thank you for the many blessings that you have poured out onto our nation, for the gift of liberty, for the peace that we so often take for granted, and for the ability to gather and govern freely. We thank you for the men and the women who serve this country, both in uniform and leadership, and for the strength you provide them daily. We do not overlook the many provisions and protections you graciously extend to us as a people. And today, Lord, we lift a special prayer for the people of Central Texas. Lord, as you know, on July 4th, the devastating floods, they swept through our communities, leaving loss and grief and hardship in their wake. And we ask for comfort. Surround those who are mourning. And Lord, we ask for your healing to touch those injured and for your provision to meet every need of the displaced and the hurting. Bless the first responders, the volunteers, and the neighbors who have come together in compassion. May hope rise even in the midst of great sorrow, and may your presence be near to the brokenhearted. And now, Lord, as this Senate begins its work, we ask that you grant each member wisdom and encouragement. May they carry out their responsibilities with integrity, always mindful of the freedom so dearly paid for. Strengthen them for the decisions of the day and the challenges to come. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Excellent prayer. You all can be seated. Welcome to the gallery. I guess you're on your summer vacation visiting, so welcome. The following message from the governor, the secretary will read the message.
Proclamation by the governor of the state of Texas. To all whom these presents shall come, I, Greg Abbott, governor of the state of Texas, by authority vested in me by Article 3, Section 5A and 40, and Article 4, Section 8A of the Texas Constitution, do hereby call a special session of the 89th legislature to convene in the city of Austin, commencing at 12:00 p.m. on Monday, July 21st, 2025, to consider and act upon the following: legislation to improve early warning systems and other preparedness infrastructure in flood-prone areas throughout Texas. Legislation to strengthen emergency communications and other response infrastructure in flood-prone areas throughout Texas. Legislation to provide relief funding for response to and recovery from the storms which began in early July 2025, including local match funding for jurisdictions eligible for FEMA public assistance. Legislation to evaluate and streamline rules and regulations to speed preparedness for and recovery from natural disasters. Legislation to eliminate the STAR test and replace it with effective tools to assess student progress and ensure school district accountability. Legislation reducing the property tax burden on Texans, and legislation imposing spending limits on entities authorized to impose property taxes. Legislation making it a crime to provide hemp-derived products to children under 21 years of age. Legislation to comprehensively regulate hemp-derived products, including limiting potency, restricting synthetically modified compounds, and establishing enforcement mechanisms, all without banning a lawful agricultural commodity. Legislation further protecting unborn children and their mothers from the harm of abortion. Legislation prohibiting taxpayer-funded lobbying, including the use of tax dollars to hire lobbyists and payment of tax dollars to associations that lobby the legislature. Legislation similar to Senate Bill number 1278 from the 89th Legislature regular session that protects victims of human trafficking from criminal liability for nonviolent acts closely tied to their own victimization. Legislation that protects law enforcement officers from public disclosure of unsubstantiated complaints in personnel files. Legislation protecting women's privacy in sex-segregated spaces. Legislation proposing a constitutional amendment allowing the Attorney General to prosecute state election crimes. Legislation that provides a revised congressional redistricting plan in light of constitutional concerns raised by the U.S. Department of Justice. Legislation similar to Senate Bill number 648 from the 89th Legislature regular session that provides strengthened protections against title theft and deed fraud. Legislation similar to Senate Bill number 1253 from the 89th Legislature regular session that authorizes political subdivisions to reduce impact fees for builders who include water conservation and efficiency measures. Legislation similar to Senate Bill number 2878 from the 89th Legislature regular session relating to the operation and administration of the Judicial Department of State Government. The Secretary of State will take notice of this action and will notify the members of the legislature of my action. In testimony whereof, I have hereunto signed my name and have officially caused the seal of the state of Texas to be affixed at my office in the city of Austin, Texas, this the 9th day of July, 2025. Greg Abbott, Governor of Texas.
Chair recognizes the Dean of the Senate for a motion. Senator Swartner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and members, the Senate will meet as the caucus of the whole immediately upon our recess. And with that information, I move that the Senate stand in recess until 1:15 today, Monday, July 21st. Thank you.
Any objection? Hearing none, we will stand in recess until 1:15.
to those federal lawsuits says there is no racial gerrymandering in the drawing of these congressional districts. Are you aware that that is what the Attorney General said?
I'm aware of what the defendants' pleadings have presented, that there was no, that the maps were in all things legal.
I'm not so sure if the defendant's pleadings.
Well,
The defendant
I'm
being
sorry,
the
I
Attorney
didn't answer
General.
that very well. Let me try again.
Yeah.
I haven't read all the plaintiff's pleadings. I haven't read all the defendant's pleadings. I am generally aware of the defense. I know that the maps that I voted on, I believe to be completely legal. I believe that has been the position of the Attorney General's office as they have defended the case,
Yeah.
that the maps drawn by Senator Huffman and voted on by the body were completely legal at the time of the vote.
4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. So the pleadings were signed by Ken Paxton, were they not?
I presume they were. I don't know. They may have been signed by one of his assistant AGs.
They were. And I will not impugn Senator Huffman's character because she stood up here over and over and said there was no race. The Jeff Epstein files. I see you're smiling. I'm serious.
Well, I don't know anything about the Epstein files. All I know is I read the DOJ letter. I read the response filed by the Office of the Attorney General. And I also read the court order that came out saying they're not going to reopen at this time. And beyond that, I have no personal knowledge of any facts behind that DOJ letter.
Okay. So you believed that you voted in 2021 when you were a House member on legitimate congressional maps that did not consider race as any kind of underlying factor. Senator Huffman testified to the same thing. As much as I tried to get her to argue in a different direction or to respond in a different direction, as much as I'm sure colleagues of mine in the House, former colleagues of mine and yours, probably tried to get you to go there, those were the maps that were voted on. They were legitimate and legal maps, and suddenly we're here because the DOJ has asked us to be here, alleging that there was some kind of reverse gerrymandering.
Well, as I stated earlier, in 2021, we considered House, Senate, Congressional, and then also but in 2023, we did not do the congressional.
We did in 21.
We did it in 2020. We did congressional in 2021, but not in 2023.
That's right. And in 2021, you voted in favor of those congressional maps.
Yes.
Because you said just now, you just told us that you felt that those maps were fair and just within the Voting Rights Act. They were race neutral, and there was no indication of race bias one way or another. That's why you voted for those maps.
I would not have intentionally voted for a map if I did not think it was a legal map.
You thought it was a legal map, not an illegal map, a legal map. I'm getting a little hard of hearing.
Yes, I would not have voted. I have never voted for any map that I did not believe was a legal map in my 27 years.
Right.
3 regular redistricting cycles and now 5 special sessions on redistricting.
Right. So you said it was a legal, L-E-G-A-L map. She forwarded a legal map to us. And those are the maps that passed that House and this Senate. And now we have a rogue DOJ sending us some BS letter that all of a sudden they're not. You fashion yourself. I've always known you. I've known you now for almost 20 years, believe it or not. It's amazing how time flies. You still look good, me not so much. 20 years has passed. And I've always known you for being a states' rights kind of guy. Is that a fair statement?
I believe in the constitutional doctrine of federalism. But again, what we're here today for is to talk about this resolution that's before us.
Yeah, I'll get to that in just a second. You think this is a federal overreach?
I don't have an opinion on that.
You don't have an opinion on that. Let's talk about the rules. Us being here costs the state of Texas taxpayers money, right?
Yes, being here for all the items on the special session, there's always a cost when we're here.
No doubt. And for me, the thing that I want to do here most, I'm not on that committee, is the flood relief, the disaster preparedness, the things that impacted Senator Flores' district so much, and so many of our constituents from all over this state that were there and lost their lives and lost children. That's why I'm here. But now we're talking about this. And because we're talking about the rules, I think Senator Blanco did this incredible job. And then you followed up with something. I know someone's going to put an amendment on this. You said that you want to make this as equally as transparent as the work that was done by Senator Huffman. That's exactly what you said just now, right?
Yes, I thought she did a great job.
I thought so too. I may not have disagreed with the outcome, but I thought so too. 12 regional hearings. 12 regional hearings, as was just illustrated to us by Senator Blanco. In order for us to have an equal and transparent type of process as we did back in 2021, it seems to me like we should have 12 regional hearings in this state. What do you say?
Again, I think that the virtual hearings are much more open to the public than anything we have ever done in-person hearings.
Right.
But we'll play it by ear and we'll move forward and we'll continue to have hearings as long as it seems to be productive
Yeah, you
toward
said that.
The objective of the committee.
Yeah, you said that earlier. You said that I've often thought that people would complain, that they can't get parking. They can't get parking at the universities. I don't think Senator Huffman had that problem. I don't think there was I never heard that there was a parking problem. And as far as us having these virtual hearings, because you think that that's just more transparent, Senator? Well, then why the hell are we here? Let me just do this at home in my underwear. That'd be better for me.
It wouldn't be better for us.
Well, that's fair. I promise to keep my hands above the desk. But let's be very clear. We're here because transparency calls for us to be here in person and to hear from witnesses and to hear testimony in person and be able to cross-examine them one way or another. And you'd rather have people sit in a queue and get kicked off that queue digitally, as often happens. As often happens because, let me tell you something, Senator. I represent more counties than you do. 14. And the vast majority of them off in West Texas, along with Senator Blanco, where the internet's not so great. We have a lot of work to do yet still in this building. And sometimes you're sitting there on a Zoom and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and all of a sudden the internet goes off and then you can't get back on the damn Zoom. And yet you think that's more transparent. You think that giving somebody hours to wait online is just more transparent, so they don't have to pay for parking, I guess. Is that your testimony?
I think you have to weigh that against how difficult it is for someone to drive from far West Texas or far East Texas, take a day or two off work, find childcare for their kids, and to participate in an in-person. And even if we go to regional, there's 254 counties in the state of Texas. the majority of the people in the majority of counties are still going to have to travel a substantial distance to be able to go to those in-person hearings.
Yeah.
Again, we also will be, all of the hearings on any bill, when we get to that substantive point, all of the hearings on any bill will not only be online, but they will be in person here at the Capitol, as all bills in the normal course of business of the Senate, as all bills are considered.
You know, Senator, I'm about to wrap up here. Far be it from me to agree with anything that the Attorney General has ever had to say. But he said that there was no racial determination in determining those districts in 2021, and he said that in the lawsuit. Senator Huffman said it, and you said it. And so why the hell are we here? Because you have yet to answer that very basic question, other than the fact that the Department of Justice, that won't even show us the Jeff Epstein files, has asked us to be here. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Johnson, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President, for questions of the bill author.
Do you yield?
Certainly.
Thank you, Senator King. I know you've been up for a while. Let's talk about, you moved to take up and consider the bill, and so I think it's a very appropriate discussion to have. Is it actually the right time to take up and consider this mechanism to carry out a redistricting? And you've mentioned that these are pretty much the same rules, I think, are they identical to the rules that we passed 31-0 last time?
They're identical to 2021 and 2023, with the exception that they don't include the SBOE or Texas House or Texas Senate.
And so is there also another exception, that exception being that there's no constitutional obligation for us to draw any maps right now?
I think that's a matter of question of law that would be a perfectly appropriate question for one of the hearings that we'll be having.
Thank you. A question of law, that reminds me of the next question. Has anyone filed suit challenging the constitutional validity of the districts that were questioned in the DOJ letter?
Well, the only lawsuit I'm aware of is the one that's been going on in El Paso for the last 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years for that one, and yet these districts that were raised in the DOJ letter are not the subject, so far as you and I know, of any pending litigation, right?
Again, I'm not familiar with all the details of the litigation, but I believe they were challenging the maps as a whole, simply because there's always a domino effect. If you move one thing, it affects others. I think the entire maps are before the court, but again, that'd be a better question for the Attorney General's office.
Are you aware of anyone having filed suit claiming that the districts described in the DOJ letter were unconstitutionally constructed along racial lines? Just your knowledge.
I'm not aware of any new lawsuits, and I haven't read all the pleadings of all the plaintiff parties in the existing lawsuits.
Despite the fact you haven't read all the pages, and I'll confess that I haven't either, you don't think that those lawsuits challenge these districts, do you?
I don't want to make any conjecture. I'm sorry.
Okay. Wouldn't it be appropriate for us to wait until a lawsuit is filed and let the courts figure this out the way they do in other cases?
I don't have an opinion on that. I'm here because the governor's placed the issue on the call, and I want us to perform our duty as senators, as the body of the Senate, to move forward on that, and that requires this resolution.
If you believe that the governor called upon the legislature to enact something that you thought was patently unconstitutional, do you believe it would be our obligation to do so?
Again, I don't want to get into hypotheticals or conjecture. I believe the governor has complete authority in his office to put this on the call.
I agree with you, and let's make it not hypothetical. The United States Supreme Court remarked in Bartlett versus somebody that, it wasn't really somebody, it was somebody's name. Bartlett versus something. The United States Supreme Court said, although he was talking about crossover districts, which is different than a coalition district. A crossover district being where one class of voters that doesn't typically vote with a minority group of voters actually votes the same way they do, and so a district is constructed that way. And the court found that, if I'm recalling this stuff correctly, I'm not an expert in this, it's a crash course. I think the court found that you can't construct a district that way, but it raises, quote, serious constitutional questions, 14th Amendment questions. If you were to deliberately go in and destroy a district because of that coalition crossover effect. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of the case Bartlett. I've studied it.
Do you understand it to leave looming over this legislature the hanging question of whether or not the action that's proposed by the governor's call is unconstitutional?
You know, again, those are things you're certainly welcome to bring up in committee or on the floor. But again, all we're doing here today is bringing up the resolution. We don't have a bill before us. We don't have anything before us but the resolution.
And that's precisely my point. The motion right now is to take up and consider something that probably, in my view, and possibly in other people's view, causes us to take an unconstitutional action that is ordinarily pursued through the courts, not the legislature. So shouldn't we set this aside and wait for the proper moment and proper mechanism?
I'm not aware of any prohibition against us taking up congressional redistricting in this special session.
Did we take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution or do what the governor tells us?
I think you know the answer to that. We all took the same oath of office.
Because I have an alternative for us. Instead of taking up this resolution, which the governor called upon us to do, which causes us to venture into questionable, at best, unconstitutional territory, 5 years into a decennial, which we've never actually done, and I agree with you, it's not prohibited, probably should be, which brings up an opportunity. If there were an opportunity to, instead of doing the governor's bidding on this instance, to instead sign a resolution banning mid-decennial redistricting, would that be a better option to take up and consider today? Because it's been filed. It's mine. It's Senate Joint Resolution 1. Any interest?
Again, I don't want to respond to any hypotheticals. We have...
Oh, it's real. It's not hypothetical.
We have a resolution before us. If you have an amendment to it, I know the body will entertain that amendment.
Thanks, Senator King.
Senator Miles, what purpose?
Questions to the chairman and the author.
Do you yield? Senator King, do you yield?
Yes, sir.
Sir King, Chairman King, I'm not a lawyer, so, I'm not going to have any legal questions for you. I'm just a guy that's honored to have represent his community for which he was born and raised in. And I just want to kind of recap and break it down like I always tell my colleagues, let's make it plain for the people back home in my district and some of y'all's district. And just kind of recap what's been said today and understand where we're going. Is that okay?
Certainly.
I want to make sure I first start off by saying everybody who stood up here today has said how much we respect you, sir, as a colleague and as a man. So I want to echo that too as well. Everyone has stood up and said how much we respect you as a colleague and a man and a Christian. So I want to echo that as well.
Thank you.
But I do want to make this plain and break it down for some of the people in the audience and definitely for my people and some of y'all's constituents back home. We in church, we say, make it plain, Pastor, make it plain. So I just want to make sure we're doing that. So in 2021, which has come up multiple times, that was a scheduled every 10-year redistricting. Is that correct?
Yes, traditionally you do redistricting in the year following the decennial census.
And the decennial census. And we do those because every 10 years after the census, we have a change in population, a shift in numbers, shift in locations. And that's pretty much the reason we do those every 10 years after the census, right?
You're required to do them then, but as
required by who?
by the Texas and U.S. Constitution.
Constitution, there we go.
But in 2023, we were also required to, because of the time frame in which the census data was actually produced, and that's why it required us to take up redistricting again in 2023. However,
The census
however,
information
it is not.
was late, right?
I'm sorry.
The census information was late getting to us. That's why
Yes, we had to take it up again because of the late date that the census data was given to Texas.
Right.
And we weren't able to pass redistricting during the regular session. However, we have in the past, the Texas legislature, done redistricting in non-decennial years beyond 2023.
And thank you for helping me make that plain and clear to the people back home. And we voted on that map as a body, correct?
Yes, every map is like a bill, and they have to pass by a majority of the votes of the body.
And it passed this body, correct? And it passed the House, is that correct?
It did. I don't remember the vote count, but I recall it was not unanimous.
And in 23,
I believe it was on partisan lines.
And in 23, who was the majority party and who was the minority party here in 23?
Well, I mean, 2023 in the Senate, the Republicans were the majority party.
And how about in 2021?
It was the same.
And now, we all know that the majority partner is Republicans, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to make it plain for the people back home, that's all. And in 2023, we had a large population growth, is that correct?
I haven't seen the census data for 2023.
Well, if
But
I recall
common
correctly,
sense says Texas has continued to grow.
has continued to grow. And as well, I think one of my other colleagues stated, and I'm just trying to recap, one of the other colleagues stated that it was a growth in, majority of it was in minority population, is that correct?
I'm sure that some of the things will come up in the information gathering hearings.
Were you aware, Senator, that Texas is one of the largest population of African Americans now in the state of Texas, bigger than Atlanta, bigger than Chicago, bigger than Los Angeles, that we had more African Americans moving here than anywhere else?
I know we have a large population, larger than many other states.
And majority of it is African. The largest population for the country is right here, growing, moving to Texas.
I don't know the specific racial data, and I do not intend to look at that during this process.
I'm telling you what I know just for the fact, but, and you said multiple times, I've heard you say, which I'm glad to hear you say, that you wanted everybody to have an opportunity to have their voices heard, correct?
Yes.
On this redistricting. And I think it was brought out that in 22, 21, 23, there were 14 hearings. Is that roughly what I think I heard?
I think that's correct.
And right now we've got 4, and they're going to be regional, correct?
Well, 4 that we've planned out so far. But again, we always do things differently. The tradition of the Senate has always been that we do things differently in a special session just because of the shorter time frame. And we have passed out redistricting maps in special sessions previously on multiple occasions.
And I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, you would agree with me that this is a very, very big issue that we're about to address. Very important, and very important to the makeup of the state of Texas. Funding coming in from the federal government. It's a very big issue to our population. Is that correct?
I hope it's important to everyone.
Sir?
I said I hope it is important to everyone.
Yes, that's what my question was. Wouldn't you agree this is a very important issue to everyone involved in the state of Texas? So, last wrap-up question. It's been asked multiple times, and as my colleague emotionally just said, we still don't know, you still have no idea to why we're doing this, with the exception of this letter coming from the DOJ. Is that correct?
Well, I know the reason we are here today is because the governor put congressional redistricting on the call.
On the call. And that's why we're here, correct? Because we got it on the call and it came from this letter, resulted from this letter from the DOJ.
That's the purpose, that's the reason we are laying out this resolution today.
Okay. I think we're saying the same thing.
I'm sorry?
I think we're saying the same thing, Senator,
I
as a
think
result of this letter from the DOJ.
Well, I can't speak for the governor, and I haven't talked to the governor.
Okay.
What I do know is that we have a duty to take up all the issues on the call, to consider all those issues, and to do that, if we're going to stick with the tradition of the Senate, then we would need to pass a resolution like this as step one.
Okay. And this is step one. Senator, let me ask you a question. Do you have any idea, were you aware that on this letter from the DOJ that there are 4 congressional districts listed?
I have read the letter.
Were you aware that one of those districts is wholly in my district, Senate District 13? The second one is partly majority in my district, and the third has a slight part of that one in Senate District 13. Were you aware of that?
I think you mentioned all that when we talked on the phone Saturday.
Yeah. I want to know if the body knew. I'm trying to make sure they understand as well. So I'm going to repeat that. There are 4 districts that's mentioned here in this DOJ letter. 3 of them are partly or wholly in my district, Senate District 13. Do you think it's coincidental that Senate District 13, for which 3 of these districts are in, congressional districts in, and that I sit in, do you think it's coincidental that it is the only majority African-American district in the whole state of Texas?
Again, I don't have any personal knowledge of any of the facts behind the DOJ letter. All I can tell you is that I have read it, and that I then read the response by the Attorney General's office to that letter, and that's really all I know.
And I know, and all my colleagues know, that you're a thinking man. You're a very intelligent thinking man. And my question is simple. Do you just think it's a coincidence that 3 of these districts that are mentioned on this DOJ letter are in my district, the only African-American majority district in the state of Texas?
Again, and I speak in all honesty, I have zero knowledge of any data, any facts, anything that the DOJ relied upon to draft their letter to the governor and to the Attorney General.
Well, if I could, let me tell you, I don't think it's a coincidence. Okay, and I just want to put that on you and my colleagues' minds, that I don't think it's a coincidence, and my colleagues, my former Democratic colleagues, don't think it's a coincidence, and I can assure you, my people back home don't think it's a coincidence. So let me move on. I heard you saying we're going to have hearings as long as they're productive. You just said that about 2 questions ago. We're going to have hearings as long as they're productive.
Well, within reasonable confines of the special session, it'll have a lot to do with what the members of the committee wish. I want that to be a participatory process. I can tell you today that we will have at least 4, and then we'll see how things are. You know, if on the last 2, if we're overwhelmed with more people, it may be prudent to keep going. I just don't know until we get started.
Well, my follow-up question to that is, how do you define productive?
Well, I think that's going to be common sense, just like any hearing that you've been in the Senate. At the end of that hearing, you're able to look and say, hey, this was a productive hearing. We learned things. We heard from people. There were substantive comments that it helped guide the Senate committee in its deliberations and considerations. And I think it would be the same for these hearings. And I hope you'll participate in them. I hope that I know it's a tough schedule for everybody, all the committee members, but that's one reason I called you. I just wanted to make sure that if we set these dates that everybody could be a part of them that's on the committee. And of course, it's open to any member of the Senate to come and sit at the dais and be a part of that hearing, and also to help us get the word out to everybody that might be interested in testifying or listening in.
Okay, based on your definition of productive, what happens if they're not productive? Have you thought that far? What happens if they're not productive?
I just having been in those kind of hearings many times before, as most people in here have, I just believe they are going to be productive, and I would be very, very surprised if they were not.
Well, if you want production and you want everybody to be able to participate, we're only having 4 of them in different regions, but 3 of these districts are right here in Houston-Harris County. In Houston-Harris County, that doesn't make pretty much productive sense. If we're going to have four hearings, and they're going to be regional, but 3 of these districts are in Harris County, in my district, but we're only going to have 1. I don't think that's getting us off to a great productive start.
So just, and again, I know this is a little bit of a difference of opinion, but I was trying to count up. I think I've attended 11 in-person field hearings on redistricting. No, 12. No, 11. 11 hearings. And at each of those, it was difficult for people to get there. We heard later, I can't get there that early, I have childcare, all these things. My personal opinion is that having the virtual hearings is much more conducive to getting as many people engaged as we can, because we're able to do it day and evening. They don't have to drive from Marfa or from Weatherford or anywhere else to get here. They don't have to arrange for childcare. They don't have to spend the time and money. They don't have to get a hotel. They don't have to do all those things. When you have them in the field, yes, you'll get a lot. If we have one in Fort Worth, we'll get a good crowd of people from Tarrant County, but we're not going to get people from other places. We're not going to get them from other places. And if we do these...
I totally agree with you on that statement.
If we do the Zoom process, we're going to get people from all over the state, and we can focus on those regions. So we focus on the South Texas or East Texas or wherever.
Mr. Chairman, you do know that in rural areas and urban areas, the digital divide is real, correct?
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble.
You do understand that in rural parts of Texas and urban parts of Texas, that the digital divide is real. Meaning that a lot of people in urban Texas and rural Texas don't have access.
There are certainly parts
to
of
virtual
Texas.
to virtual capacity or virtual capacity.
There are certainly parts of Texas where you have to get on, where you're either going to have line of sight wireless, or you're going to have gaps in service, or you're going to have to get on Elon Musk's satellite service. But
I agree with you. And there's parts of Texas, urban and rural, where they just don't have the technology present to them, available to them. But yet you want everybody to be heard on this very important matter.
I'm sure there are still areas in Texas where there is no internet service. But those folks also would have to drive from deep East Texas to wherever the regional hearing was held. And so the point being, I think when you look at the totality of the circumstances, I think the virtual hearings provide a much easier path for more people to be a part of the hearing.
Well, I think I'm concerned about people in rural Texas, and especially people in urban parts of Texas, such as my Senate district, that they won't have access to the technology, and knowing because I'm in my district, that the digital divide is real, and some people just don't have access. And those are the people who are going to be impacted by this redistricting the most. That's what concerns me. And we're sitting here saying we want everybody to be a part, everybody to be transparent. We're going to give them 48 hours, which I have an amendment coming up shortly asking you for additional time, because a lot of people can't just, working class people in all of our districts can't just get off work when they want to go to a hearing. And I'm not going to even bring back up the fact that you got 4 regional hearings, but 3 of these districts that are in question are in my district. So I've got an abundance of people that we probably won't be able to find a place of capacity to take up all of those people that are in my district that are going to be affected by this. That's all I'm saying, Senator. I've got some concerns. And I'm wondering why, as if I don't know. I think we all here know why. If we're going to do transparency, we should all speak on it. Since we're talking about so much transparency, why at this time we're having to do what I call not redistricting, but rigged districting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator West, what purpose?
3 questions, my friend.
Do you yield?
Certainly.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm not going to try to be redundant in terms of some of the questions, but I want to talk about process for a second. And yes, I've had the opportunity to serve on numerous redistricting committees and have had the benefit of going to regional meetings and also virtual meetings. And I want to start right there, first of all. As it relates to these meetings, I would suggest that you consider having, if you have a regional meeting, also have a virtual component to it. So therefore being in a location where you don't have issues, logistical issues, parking, things of that nature, and also being able to pull in persons from out that region virtually that cannot make it to that location. And by doing that, I think you maximize participation. As it relates to, well, what are your thoughts about that, first of all?
And I mean, it's a good thought, but I also recall back in 2019 when we were doing some regional hearings, we would try to set that up, but when you go to that conference center or that hotel or wherever you were holding them at, we had trouble getting continual service. We just ran into problems with being able to get it worked out in a remote location, because when you walk in to a remote location, you're bringing your own equipment, but you're still tying into their internet. And I recall that we had problems with that. So I guess my point is, a very good thought, but at the same time, it is not a complete answer, because when we do things at the Capitol, we know they're getting out. We know without any doubt it's a tested process. We've used it twice before, and we know it works.
But let me
if I go to Arlington, past experience showed it didn't always work.
Let me recommend to you go. Then that was back in 2016.
That was 2019.
That's been 6 years
last
ago.
Regional one.
Technology has in fact advanced since that time.
No question.
Okay, and so therefore, I suggest to you that if we went to our universities that have probably state-of-art systems, that we would not have some of the problems that you encountered back in 2019, if indeed that's something that you want to do.
I'll certainly take that under advisement.
And secondly, you know, Trump has said that he sees about 5 seats coming out of Texas. That's what he said. And has that been communicated to you by any member of the Trump administration?
I've had no contact with any member of the Trump administration.
Has anyone from your staff been communicating with the Trump administration or Department of Justice?
No.
About this? Anyone you're thinking about hiring? Have they been in communication with the Trump administration or the Department of Justice about this issue? That's a good question, wasn't it?
Well, no, that's a good question.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think through it. One of the law firms, 2 of the law firms that I interviewed by phone,
Okay.
one and maybe both of them had attended a meeting with maybe the Republican delegation. I don't know if DOJ members or White House members or anybody else could have been there or not. I don't know. But point being, we have interviewed several law firms, and I don't know for sure, but I do know one of them mentioned having attended a large meeting that probably conflicted them out of things.
Okay, and then the reality is those meetings were about this particular initiative by Trump.
Yes, they were about the possibility of different states doing redistricting.
One of them being the state of Texas.
One of them being the state of Texas.
And during that meeting, isn't it true? Hold on a second. That they discussed about how many Republican seats they could get out of the state of Texas?
I don't know what all they talked about. I just know that they had attended meetings, because you asked if any counsel I had interviewed had participated in meetings. I just want to say they may have.
Okay, now, look, I'm going to ask this question, and, I want to make certain you're clear. This is not directed towards you, but I'm going to tell the members of this body that this particular initiative has the appearance of being racist, So how do you, as the chair of this special redistricting committee, make certain that those persons, normally mostly minorities, are assured that this is going to be a fair process? How do you do that when the perception, overall perception, but not just African Americans, but Hispanics also, that this is racist? How do you do that?
I can assure you that any bill that's considered by the redistricting committee, prior to it being considered, prior to me looking at it or anybody else, as has been the practice in prior sessions, it will have been reviewed by a third party to make sure that it is in compliance with the Voting Rights Act. And if I'm not told that it's in compliance with the Voting Rights Act, then it would not be something we would consider.
Okay, but see, you say third parties, and the third parties are going to be persons that will be.
Well, in the past, it's been the last session, I believe it was someone either in-house or contracted with by the Attorney General's office.
Let me say this again. The third party is not going to be objective. They will be very subjective in their determination as to whether or not it's compliant with the Voting Rights Act, sir. Would you not agree with that?
Well, their directive would be to look at the proposed bill amendment map and to determine if it meets, looking at jingles and everything else involved, to determine if it complies with the Voting Rights Act. And if it does, then we will consider it. If they tell me that it does not, then we will not.
In terms of, let me circle back to regional hearings. I would suggest, like in North Central Texas, that you use UNT Dallas or UT Arlington that have the capabilities of having enough parking for anyone and everyone who wants to participate, as well as having the technological ability to provide the internet capability for people within the region to be able to come in. I'd make that recommendation. As it relates to your charge, do you see the whole map in the state of Texas being opened for reconsideration?
That's a good question, and I think that's something the committee needs to discuss when we look into the scope of the governor's call.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So I think that's an interesting question, a valid question that you raise, and I think that's something that the committee should discuss when we look at the specific text of the governor's call.
And the reason I asked that question is because a few minutes ago you said that as a result of the districts that are being targeted, that you've got it'll have a sort of I think you said rippling effect. I may misquote you on that.
Well, it's just
effect.
We all know from past redistricting, anytime you adjust one district, it by pure math affects the boundaries of at least one neighboring district, if not more.
Right, and that's the reason I asked you that particular question. This is what is out there in terms of people having conversations about this. That what's going to happen is that in Houston, the two minority districts are going to be paired with one another, and they may very well impact the district that I think it's in Fort Bend County. I may be wrong in that area. There's been no conversation about that majority Hispanic district, and I think Sylvia Garcia is also being impacted by this. And so there'll be two African-American districts paired with one another, or either African-American and Hispanic district being paired, and that there'll be some changes in South Texas. Have you heard those rumors?
I have intentionally not entered into any discussions about racial data.
No, I know it. I didn't say that. I said, have you heard the rumors?
What I've heard is all encompassed within what the senators have said today in their questions.
So you have or have not heard the rumors? That's what I'm asking.
I'm aware of the 4 districts that are listed in the DOJ letter and where those districts are.
Now, today is the 21st. Are you aware that 10 days ago, the Attorney General of the state of Texas sent a letter to the U.S. Department of Justice concerning Civil Rights Division concerning what's going on in redistricting here in the state of Texas? Are you aware of that letter?
No.
Okay, let me represent to you that in that letter, on the second page, second paragraph, he states the following. The evidence, he's talking about the trial that was going on in El Paso. Let me put it in context. The evidence at that trial was clear and unequivocal. The Texas legislature did not pass race-based electoral districts for any of those political maps. And the political maps he's talking about. Texas Senator Joan Huffman, who chaired the Senate Redistricting Committee, testified under oath that she drew Texas districts blind to race and sought to maximize Republican political advantage balanced against traditional redistricting criteria. That seems pretty clear and unequivocal, does it not?
Yes. It
okay,
says clearly what it says.
Okay, and so I got another part I want to talk to you about also. If indeed, as you're going into structuring this committee, guiding the committee, discharging your responsibility to consider redistricting, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to come out with a determination as to whether or not to redistrict. Is that correct?
Well, it's correct that if the committee considers a bill, that bill will either be voted out of the committee or not voted out of committee. If it is voted out of the committee, it'll come with a favorable recommendation for it to be adopted or passed by the Senate, and then the Senate would vote on it.
I understand that. You're the chairman of the committee, so you get great weight in terms of what you do and how you run a committee, because that's what chairs do. And so from my vantage point, and you're also, how many years have you been practicing law?
Oh, way too many.
Way too many?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Decades.
Today's thing, way too many. All right. So, you know what do they call it? Summary judgment is?
Yes.
What do you have to have in order to get summary judgment in a case?
Well, you don't want any outstanding facts.
Aha. Okay. Now, if indeed facts that the Senate has, that our chair, you know where I'm going, don't you? Our chair, the members of the Republican Party here, and the Attorney General of the state of Texas has basically said that there was no race-based, that the Texas legislature did not pass race-based electoral districts. Those are the facts, are they not?
Yes, I believe that we did.
Let me go further.
Yes, I have. I believe that the maps passed under Senator Huffman's leadership were legal.
Okay, and so if that's the case, what are we doing here? Let me go further. This is in the letter also. The Texas legislature has led the nation in rejecting race-based decisions, making its redistricting process. It's drawn its current maps in conformity with traditional, non-racial redistricting criteria to ensure Texas continues to adopt policies that will truly make America great again. If I wasn't on the floor of the Senate, I'd say something derogatory towards that last statement. America is great. We don't have to make it great again. But the reality is, when you have the Attorney General sending a letter 10 days ago stating these facts, isn't that pretty convincing evidence that this is a waste of time?
So I'm 100% confident, based on past experience, that at the information gathering hearings and at the hearings on any legislation, that there will be parties in testimony who will probably refer back to the same thing you're referring to, and those will be matters for the committee to consider and discuss at that time. But for right now, all we're here on is the resolution that we need to put in place so that we can begin to have those hearings. I'm not discounting the questions you're asking. I'm not discounting the assertions or anything else or that any other member has asked. I'm just saying that really today is not the time to go over all that. The time today is just to look at this resolution, and the question before us is, do we want to do the same thing we did in 2021 and 2023? And if so, let's vote on it, move it out.
Okay. And I think that I want to get there myself. I got a few more questions before we get there. You would agree with me also that the Attorney General of the state of Texas, heretofore, when the federal government, Department of Justice, contest what we've done here in the state of Texas, that the Attorney General normally files suit against that Department of Justice, right? You'd agree with that, would you not?
I know that the current Attorney General has filed a whole lot of lawsuits, very good lawsuits in many cases.
In many cases.
I don't know off the top of my head how many have been against the Department of Justice or the state of Alabama or whoever.
Well, here's the deal.
I don't know.
You know, you and I will go back and forth against that one. But that's the reality. Here we have a bill passed by the state of Texas, signed by the governor, defended and being defended in federal court by the Attorney General, a letter from the Attorney General 11 days ago to the Department of Justice, and now we find ourselves here on a call to consider redistricting. That's where we find ourselves. My last question. There were complaints in the past that we would invite Texans to be a part of the process. Testifying in person or virtually. Then we would discount their testimony. We really didn't consider it for any purpose whatsoever other than checking a box. Senator King, as chairman of this committee, are you just going to check the box? Or are you going to actually listen to people and have that testimony help inform your guidance of other members on the committee and your vote?
I want and intend for myself, and I'm confident that all the other members of the committee have the same intent, is that we have very serious and very legitimate hearings, whether they be virtual or in person here at the Capitol, wherever they may be, and we'll take into consideration all the testimony that you've been in these. A lot of it's legal briefs in effect, where we're being told what they believe the law is. And there's differences of opinion that will be from different witnesses, and there'll be people coming in from different communities, and then a lot of people just testifying here from Austin, but whatever they say, I know me personally, and I truly believe for all the other members of the committee, that we'll all listen intently, we'll be there to learn, and at the end of the day, we'll be there to do what's right.
In closing, like I said, members, and all of us have personal relationships. What I'm hearing outside these halls, that this has the appearance of being racist. Say that we shouldn't be taking into consideration race, then hopefully we'll get to a point where we don't take into consideration race, because in this instance, the appearance is that we are taking it into consideration. And I hope that you will be true to your word, as I know you have been with me in the past, and make certain that people know that this will be a fair process. Thank you for your indulgence.
Senator Eckhart, for what purpose?
To ask questions of the author.
Senator King, do you yield?
Certainly.
Thank you so much, Senator King. I am honored to sit next to you. We've had many, many good conversations. And I don't envy you this assignment. Of course, this is the very first thing that we're taking up in this chamber, despite the fact that 135 people are dead from flooding in Central Texas, 10 in Travis County, 3 are still missing. Senator King, what is the rush on mid-decade redistricting? Why are we rushing to do this?
I haven't said there's a rush. What I have said is that we're just responding, at this time, just responding to the governor's call with this resolution.
And yet, how much notice have Texans had that we are going to do this unusual mid-decade redistricting?
I think they'll have the same type of notice that they get on any bills of critical interest in our legislative process.
How much notice do Texans have that we will be redistricting in the first session after the decennial census?
Well, I think it's like anything else. There's interest groups that stay heavily involved in this throughout not just the decennial census, but there's litigation and other political matters, partisan matters going on throughout each decade. And I think that those groups do a really good job of trying to inform their constituencies. And we never seem short at hearings on having plenty of people that want to testify.
You yourself have stated that we are under no obligation to do mid-decade redistricting, although we are under an obligation to do redistricting in the first session after a decennial census, correct?
That's correct, although there are times when it could be compelled, such as if a court orders it or something like that.
But you have already answered Senator Alvarado's questions. We are not compelled by a court order in this circumstance, correct?
No, we're not. In 2023, we were under a constitutional requirement to do House and Senate again because of the late date that the census data was sent to Texas.
And of course, we only received the official copy of this resolution at 2:35 this afternoon, correct?
Yes, I did send Senator Alvarado as chair of the caucus. We sent a copy to her staff Sunday, Saturday, and so that they would have a couple days notice. We didn't have it ready to go until then. As soon as it was ready to go, we got it over to the caucus chair.
And now you're not operating currently as the chair of a committee because one has not been yet named, correct?
That is correct. I'm just winging it here.
So can you inform us why a special committee has not been formed by the Lieutenant Governor, since the Lieutenant Governor has formed a special committee for flooding, naming the members as well as the chair, and also announcing a first field hearing?
I haven't talked to him directly about that. I suspect the reason is that a special committee cannot pass a bill, cannot take up legislation. They are for the purposes of information gathering. The reason that we have to have this resolution is because in our current rules, we didn't set up a redistricting committee. And so the purpose of The resolution would be to allow the President of the Senate to appoint a Senate redistricting committee, and as a procedural committee, it can take up legislation.
I would like to make a parliamentary inquiry because under Rule 11.03, it states very clearly that the Lieutenant Governor